Sleep would not come. The man lay perfectly still in his sleeping bag, his eyes wide open, staring up at the dark canvas of his tent. Every tiny sound from the forest outside made him jump. A twig snapping sounded like a bone breaking. The rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps creeping closer and closer. He tried to tell himself it was just the wind, just the normal noises of the woods at night, but the memory of the scream was burned into his mind. It had been high and thin, a sound of pure terror that had sliced through the quiet of the wilderness and ended far too quickly. He pulled the sleeping bag tighter around his shoulders, but the cold he felt was not from the night air. It was a deep, chilling fear that had settled deep within him, a feeling that something was terribly wrong. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to breathe slowly and evenly. He tried to think of other things, of his home, of his warm bed, of anything but the scream. But it was no use. The sound echoed in his memory over and over again. Was it an animal? A fox, perhaps, or a bobcat? He had heard their cries before, but they had never sounded like this. This was different. This was human. It was the sound of someone in desperate, awful trouble. He sat up, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. He wanted to call out to see if anyone was there, but the fear was too strong. What if the thing that made the scream was still out there, waiting in the darkness? The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. The moon cast long, strange shadows through the trees, making familiar shapes look like twisted monsters. The man imagined figures moving just at the edge of his vision, flitting between the trunks of the ancient pines. He thought about packing up his things right then and there, leaving everything behind and running back to his car. But the car was miles away, down a dark and winding trail. The thought of being out in the open with no light and no shelter was even more terrifying than staying put. He was trapped in his small tent, a tiny island of fabric in a vast, dark ocean of trees, waiting for the sun to rise. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the first hint of grey light began to filter through the trees. The darkness started to recede, and the scary shapes outside his tent slowly turned back into ordinary trees and bushes. The man let out a long, shaky breath he didn't realize he had been holding. The night was over. He had made it through. The fear was still there, a knot in his stomach, but the daylight brought a small measure of comfort. He told himself that in the light of day, everything would make sense. He had probably just imagined it all, his mind playing tricks on him in the unfamiliar silence of the deep woods. With the morning sun filtering through the canopy, the man cautiously unzipped his tent. The air was crisp and cold, and the world seemed peaceful, almost mocking the terror he had felt all night. His small campfire from the previous evening was nothing but a circle of grey, dead ash. The food he had left out, a piece of bread and some cheese, was completely untouched. No raccoon or squirrel had come to steal it. It was as if the animals themselves had stayed away from this place last night, hiding from something that had scared them even more than it had scared him. The silence was heavy, and the usual morning chorus of birds was strangely absent. The woods were too quiet. He stood up and stretched his stiff muscles, trying to shake off the lingering sense of dread. He walked around his small campsite, inspecting the ground. He told himself he was looking for animal tracks, something to explain the scream. Maybe it was a mountain lion, he thought, trying to convince himself. They could make sounds that were almost human. He scanned the soft earth near the edge of the clearing, his eyes moving slowly over the pine needles and damp soil. He was hoping to find the paw print of a large cat or a bear, anything that would give him a rational explanation and allow him to calm his racing heart. But what he found was not an animal track. Near the edge of the trees, pressed deep into a patch of mud, was a footprint. It was long and narrow, with 5 clear toes. It was unmistakably human, and it was bare. A cold shiver traced its way down the man's spine. Who would be walking through these woods in the middle of the night without any shoes? He followed the direction the print was pointing and found another, and then another, leading away from his camp and disappearing into the thick undergrowth. The person had been close, just beyond the light of his fire, watching him. The man backed away slowly, his eyes fixed on the spot where the footprints vanished into the woods. All the fear from the night before came rushing back, stronger than ever. This was not his imagination. The scream was real. The feeling of being watched was real. Someone had been here, silently observing him from the shadows. He looked around wildly, his gaze darting from tree to tree, half expecting to see a figure standing there. But there was nothing, only the silent, watchful trees and the cold, empty clearing. He was not alone out here, and the thought made his blood run cold. As dusk began to settle over the forest once more, a new kind of fear took hold of the man. The thought of another night in the tent, another night spent listening to the darkness, was unbearable. He couldn't leave. It would be dark soon, and the trail was too dangerous to navigate without light. His only choice was to stay and face whatever was out there. He decided he needed protection. He needed light. He needed a fire, but not the small, friendly campfire he had made the night before. He needed a fortress of flames, a blazing wall that would keep the shadows and whatever hid within them at a distance. He spent the last hour of daylight gathering wood, working with a frantic energy. He dragged fallen branches and heavy logs from the surrounding woods, piling them high in the center of his campsite. He didn't stop until he had a mound of fuel that was as tall as his waist. His hands were sore and covered in splinters, and sweat dripped down his face. But he didn't care. With every log he added to the pile, he felt a tiny bit safer. The fire would be his guardian. It would push back the oppressive darkness and maybe, just maybe, scare away the shoeless wanderer of the woods. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains, the man lit the fire. It caught quickly, the dry wood crackling and hissing as the flames grew. Soon a massive bonfire roared to life, casting a wide, flickering circle of orange light around his camp. The heat was intense, and he had to step back from it. Shadows danced wildly at the edge of the light, but his campsite was now a bright, warm sanctuary. He felt a sense of relief wash over him. Nothing could sneak up on him now. He could see everything clearly within the circle of light. He sat on a log, keeping his back to his tent and his eyes fixed on the fire. The flames leapt and twisted, a roaring beast that held the darkness at bay. He felt more secure than he had all day. The fire was a comforting presence, its crackling sound drowning out the unsettling silence of the forest. He told himself that no person and no animal would dare to come near such a tremendous blaze. He would sit here all night if he had to, feeding the fire and watching the woods, waiting for the safety of morning to return. He was ready. He was prepared. He was safe. Or so he thought. Or so he... For a long time nothing happened. The giant fire roared, and the man watched the trees at the edge of the light. The wall of flame did its job, creating a bright island in the sea of blackness. The man started to relax, the warmth of the fire seeping into his bones and calming his frayed nerves. He thought that maybe the footprints and the scream were just a strange coincidence. A story he was telling himself. Perhaps the person who made the tracks was long gone. He stared into the hypnotic dance of the flames, his eyelids growing heavy. The fire was so bright, so powerful, no one would dare approach it. He was safe inside his glowing circle. Then he saw it. Across the fire, just where the light began to fade into shadow, something moved. It wasn't an animal. It was a shape, tall and thin, standing perfectly still between two pine trees. The man's heart leaped into his throat. He squinted, trying to see more clearly through the wavering heat of the fire. The shape was a man. He was gaunt and wore dark, ragged clothes that seemed to blend into the shadows around him. He was just standing there, completely silent, watching. His face was a pale blur in the darkness, and the firelight reflected faintly in his wide, unblinking eyes. The man at the campsite froze, his entire body rigid with terror. He couldn't breathe, he couldn't move. How long had the stranger been standing there? Had he been there all along, just beyond the reach of the light, watching from the darkness? The stranger took one slow step forward, then another, stopping at the very edge of the firelight. He was so close now that the man could see his face more clearly. It was thin and pale, with sunken cheeks and eyes that seemed to hold a deep, ancient coldness. He raised a hand, not to wave, but just held it slightly open, as if he were waiting for something. The stranger's lips parted, and a low, raspy whisper drifted across the crackling fire. The sound was quiet, yet it cut through the noise of the flames and chilled the man to his very soul. "You're in my spot," the stranger whispered. And at that exact moment, with a sudden, impossible whoosh, the massive bonfire went out. Not dying down to embers, but extinguished completely, as if a giant blanket had been thrown over it, plunging the campsite into absolute, terrifying darkness. The only light was the faint glow of the moon far above. And from the spot, right behind him, where his tent should have been, the man heard the soft, steady sound of someone breathing.